Hi everyone, thanks so much for listening to another episode of Dogman Encounters Radio. I'm Vic Cundiff and I'll be your host for the show. Before we bring on tonight's guest, if you've had a Dogman encounter and would like to speak with me about it, whether in private or on the show, please go to dogmanencounters.com and submit a report. I'd love to hear from you. If you've had a Sasquatch sighting and would like to be a guest on Bigfoot Eyewitness Radio, please go to bigfooteyewitness.com and submit a report. All right, let's bring on tonight's guest. Tonight's guest is Sabrina Dearing. Sabrina, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Vic.
Well, thanks so much for coming on. We appreciate your time. Sabrina, please give us a brief bio on yourself.
I'm 31 years old. I've been in the Massachusetts area my whole life. I work at the local post office. I go to school at the University, Westfield State. I graduated from Holyoke Community in psychology. I also work doing outreach at the time, and on the side, I also do music.
You said you graduated with a psychology degree. I'm not going to have to worry about you trying to play mind games with me on tonight's show, am I?
Not at all.
No, I didn't think you would do that. You grew up in Springfield, Massachusetts, but your encounter happened in Chicopee. How far is Chicopee from Springfield?
It's about 4 miles.
Oh, close. Yeah, that's really close then. Since Chicopee isn't that far from Springfield, had you heard about any encounters people had had with cryptids in your area when you were growing up?
I have not. I've never heard anything about cryptids or even was familiar with the word until my encounter.
Lucky you, huh? Yeah, unfortunately. How long did it take you after you had your encounter to find out about dogmen, and how did you find out about them in the first place?
Oh, man. I would say immediately after my encounter, I started doing research. And at the time when I researched, I found that people were having encounters in Michigan, but that was it. I hadn't heard of anything. And I think the encounters in Michigan were a long time ago. So, I didn't stay updated on it at all. I was just trying to research and figure out what I saw or if anybody else had seen it at the time. So to answer your question right away, as soon as I seen it, it just didn't feel right. So I just started, trying to do my own research.
Well, I'm glad you found out what it was that you saw that night. Thank goodness for that. Why'd you wait so long to share your encounter with me, though?
I wasn't sure if I wanted to come to terms with what I saw for a long time. Like I said, I didn't hear anybody or know anybody that had any other encounters. So me having my encounter and being so far away, I wasn't even sure if what I seen was real. And then coming to terms with it and then actually sharing that and coming out and talking about it, it just seemed like a lot for me at the time. And even now, still, if it's something that you encounter, then you'll understand.
Well, unfortunately, now you know it definitely was real. When you found out about all the people who had encounters with dogmen, what were your thoughts on that?
Oh, man. My first thought was just, I guess, having empathy, just going through it and knowing how it feels to see something like that. I just can feel for the other people that have seen it. So, just being able to relate, I guess I kind of just felt bad at first, just hearing people's experience, people that couldn't sleep at night or, didn't want to go out into the woods or go out into these kind of areas. And where I had my encounter with wasn't necessarily in the woods. So, I could imagine my encounter compared to somebody else's encounter. I was terrified. So I can just imagine another setting, with these people having their encounters, some of them being in the woods, it probably really terrified them. So, my first thought is just, being able to relate and just feeling, I guess, empathy for everybody that had the same encounter and shared the same thing that I did, same experience.
It's good to realize that you definitely could have had it worse. Did it help you deal with your encounter when you found out how common encounters are or make it harder to deal with?
I guess it's kind of catch-22, maybe a 50-50. I felt good knowing that I wasn't the only one, but the fact that it's not widely talked about and widely understood why these occurrences happen, it's kind of still unsettling.
It definitely is unsettling. No doubt about that. Before you tell us about your encounter, what kind of an effect did it have on what you're willing to do now?
Since my encounter, I don't go camping. I've never been the type to really go out into the woods. However, I do like nature. Like, I like animals and stuff like that. But since my encounter, I won't go into the woods. And I am very skeptical about being out at night, late nights, dark areas, low lighting areas. And, just based on my research and people that have had these encounters in other states, it makes me not want to move to another state like Michigan or Utah, where, these incidents are more likely to happen or more likely to occur. And it makes me not want to move to these places, and it makes me not like going out into the woods or going out at night. It definitely changed my view on places and the night and the woods and a lot of things. My whole perception on what's around me changed.
Well, it's only natural that your perception would change on a lot of things, so I definitely get it. Understand, though, Sabrina, that these things are seen all over the place. It really doesn't matter where you go unless it's a densely populated area. You really could have an encounter any place that you move to. So just because you move to this state or that state especially, don't think for a second that that's going to preclude the chance of you having an encounter, unfortunately. All right, Sabrina, please tell us about your encounter now. Give us every last detail that comes to mind.
Okay, well, it was 2009. I was living in Chicopee. I had moved there because it was my first apartment. I had a roommate. It was, rent was cheap, so it was easier. I can, swing it on my own, but it was easier just to have a roommate, make things more flexible. So we had been living there. We moved in about 2007, and I would say this happened about 2009. So we were already living there about 2 years. On this particular day, we had a blackout in the area. I lived on School Street, and the area is Chicopee Center. I'm not sure if people are familiar with the area, but Chicopee Center itself only extends about 2 miles. It's a circle. So when we had the blackout, it was very hot. I lived in my first apartment, it was above a store. So if anybody's ever lived in a building, they know, the heat rises. So it was very hot. We didn't have power. So I was like, well, okay, how about we, go for a walk? My roommate, she was from the area. Her family was familiar with the area. So prior to us moving to Chicopee, because I was from Springfield, prior to us moving to Chicopee, she said, well, hey, how about we take a walk around the area and I'll show you, the areas that I'm familiar with. Okay, so before we moved in, she had took me for a walk around the area. So where I had the encounter at, I had been around that area, and she actually had a friend that lived in that particular project area. So that day I said, hey, it's hot. How about we just get out, take a walk? Mind you, when we had the blackout, it was about 9:00 at night. But, Chicopee being so small and it's not widely populated. So we're like, well, just take a swing around the block and just come back, and then hopefully the power will be back on. So we go for a walk, and we start going up a street, and the street leads to a projects. The projects is called Stonina. It's by elementary. I think the elementary is called Bow Elementary, and there's like a Shell gas station over there. So you would go up the street, and the street itself is low, very low lighted. There's not much street lights, and there's houses on both sides. Now that street bends up to a project area, and there's sidewalks on both sides, and there's like these townhouse projects on both sides. Now, once you finish the projects, you can go down past the elementary school, past the Shell gas station, and you'll end up back at School Street. So we started walking, and we walked through the low lighted street. We reached the bottom of the hill where the projects is. And we realized that the street lights were still on. The street lights were still on. And in these particular projects, the cars are parked diagonal, and they're very close together. So we started walking on the right side of the street. So by the time we got, it's a very close area. So by the time we went from the apartment building and reached the projects, it was probably about 9:15. It only took about 10, 15 minutes at that to reach the project area. So we were in the bottom. We start walking on the right side of the hill. So I'm on the left side. She's on the right side of me. So we're walking, and I would say about 10 feet, 10, 15 feet maybe ahead of us going up the hill, I see these two pair of legs walking, and they're white, very white, but not skin white, more furry kind of white. So I'm like, okay, but they were walking in a way that was human-y, and it was small though. I would say about 3 feet is what I could see from about 10 feet away. Now, this thing was walking on the right side of the street, the same side of the sidewalk that we were on. So I see it walking, and I'm like, what is that? It's very little. It's walking very stiffly. What could that be? So my first instinct was that it was a kid. So I'm like, is that a kid? And I'm looking at it, and I'm talking. She's like, I don't know if that's a kid. And I'm like, well, I'm not sure if that's a kid. It's 9:15 at night, and this kid is walking by himself. And it has to be, if it looks to be 3 feet tall, maybe it's like, what, a toddler? So I'm like, that doesn't sit right with me. I'm like, no, that can't be a kid. So I'm like trying to take a closer glance, and I'm trying to make out what it is. So in my mind, I'm like, okay, it can't be a kid. Maybe I'm not looking at it correctly. So I try to, make it out. And I noticed that there was like a blackness to it above the legs that sit 3 feet. Now the legs were walking fast and stiff up the hill, right under the project lights. This is projects, people hang out there, but for some reason it was like nobody was out there. This is when we first started on the bottom of the hill. So I'm trying to make out what I'm looking at, and I see that the blackness of this thing is tall. And I mean, I would say 10 feet tall. And I'm looking at it, I'm like, what is that? What is that? Now, from the back, I can see that it looked slender, but stiff and tall. And I could see the top of the ears look doggish. Now, the arms looked small and it looked bent, but it was walking, and it was walking quick. It didn't look left. It didn't look right. It was walking so fast and so quick, but so stiff, like it had somewhere to go. I'm like, what is that thing? Now, we're still walking behind it. For some reason, I don't know why we didn't just turn around and go back down that street that led and just go back to the apartment. But, seeing something that's like 10 feet tall, we were like, I'm not going to turn around and go down that dark street and have that thing behind me. So we're just going to just keep walking behind it and try to figure out what this thing is. So we're looking. And then while we're walking up the street, I see this kid coming down, and he had to be I was a teenager. I had to be about 18 years old. So I seen him. I was familiar with him in the area. I told you I had been living there already probably about 2 years. So I seen him, and I was familiar with him, but he was on the left side coming down. It was nighttime, and I didn't really associate with him like that, so I wasn't going to sit there and talk to him. But I'm like, okay, does he see this thing? Because he's coming down the opposite side, but he had a hood on. He had his head down. He was walking fast, and he lived on that side of the projects because prior to us moving in, my roommate had brought me to the girl's house that dated the boy that was coming down the street. So I knew them, and I had been in their house and everything, but I seen that it was late. He was walking quick. He had a hood on. Okay, maybe he has somewhere to go. But I'm like, does he see this thing or not? So, the thing proceeded to walk quickly and walk fast, and then it started to cross the street. So when it started to cross the street, I'm like, oh my God, I know he sees this thing. Like, he has to see these things. There's no way he doesn't see this thing. He just keeps walking. Out of nowhere, the thing cuts between the cars that I told you that were parked diagonal, and it just disappears. So when it disappears, we're like, okay, where did it go? Like, it did. Then you start to kind of like think to yourself, did I see it? Did I not see it? Did it disappear? Did I take my eyes off of it? We're like, trying to figure out, did we look at him too long and we missed where this tall thing went? In that area, there's projects, and then behind the projects, there's woods. Now, when she took me around the area before, she took me through the projects and around the back of the woods. Behind the woods, there's this little Indian pond. I think it's called I think it actually has a name called Indian Creek. So we went to that pond before, and it had reddish clay. So she was like, oh, this is Indian pond, I'm familiar with, and it has this kind of reddish clay. I never knew, people that are probably familiar with ponds would know why it had a reddish clay to it. But I just felt it was odd. I remember my stepfather taking me fishing when I was younger, and I'd never been to a lake that had this reddish clay to it. So it was just distinct to me. Always remember that there was a pond behind the projects called Indian Creek or something like that. So anyways, this thing crosses the street and it disappears between the cars. Like, okay, we'll just keep walking and see if we see it. And, she's like looking at me like, do you really want to walk past these cars? Like, what if this thing's still there? And I was like, well, it's either we were seeing this thing or we weren't seeing this thing. But the fact that we both seen it, we should just continue to walk and see. We probably were just crazy at the time. We were young, so who knows? But we just proceeded to just walk past the cars. We had to go that way anyways to go down the street and go back to the apartment. So when we walked past the cars, I seen on my peripheral, I don't think she wanted to look. And I'm not sure if she looked at that time, but I seen it out my peripheral and I turned and I had to look at it. When I looked at it, I seen there was this dog-like thing just sitting there staring at me. So I look at it and I love dogs. I come from a household that we have dogs. I've had dogs before. So I'm looking at it and I'm like, that's not a dog. Because what I noticed is that the first thing that I noticed was that it was black. It was a color that I have never seen before. Black is my favorite color. And mind you, I said that there was a blackout. So it was very dark in the area besides the streetlights. But you can see the blackness of it in the dark. So I'm sitting there looking at it and I know that it's looking at me. It has these big eyes. The first thing I seen that it had these pointy ears. That's what made me think it was a dog, because I seen these pointy ears. I'm like, that looks like a German Shepherd or a Doberman or something with like that pointy ears. But the ears were taller than a regular dog and it was pointy. I noticed that the eyes were black, like so black, and the eyes were big like horse eyes. And the reflection that was coming off the streetlight, you can see how black the eyes were. And I was like, wow, this thing is really, really dark. So I noticed that the nose part of it was long, and it was longer than a regular dog. So I'm like, that's not a dog. So when I'm looking at it, I'm trying to figure out what it is. And I noticed that it has its arms crossed, and it didn't necessarily, like, if anybody ever had a dog, they know when a dog kind of like lays his head on its paws. It didn't do that, but it had its arms crossed in a way that I couldn't see the paws of it. And then it also I couldn't see the chest of it, but I could see that it was looking at me. I couldn't make out the legs. It had its legs like underneath the cars that were parked, but I could see the pointed elbows and I could see the hair coming off the elbows. But the fur itself seemed to be very black and very slick, kind of like a horse's hair. So I'm like, oh my God, like this thing is staring at me, but it's just watching us walk by. And it just seemed like it was just staring right through me. Like, usually if I see a dog and, I'm like, if it makes me feel like it's like a friendly dog or not a harmful dog, I'll pet it. But I was looking at this thing and I was like, it's looking at me like, I won't bother you. You don't bother me. Just keep on about your business. So I like look away and I'm walking and I'm like, did you see that thing? She's like, yeah. I'm like, what was that? She's like, I don't know. So we just kept walking. We didn't even turn around to look. As soon as we turned the corner, we just kept walking home. And the whole time we're just talking about like, what was that thing? How did it come from being like 10 feet tall to all of a sudden just laying in between the cars? It was mind boggling to me. So I went home and I researched it and I found at the time there was a dogman that it was called a dogman and it was spotted in, I think it was like Michigan. And the person had described it walking on two. I was like, oh my God, this is what we saw. This thing was walking on 2 feet. But once we seen it up close, it was just laying down regularly, just looking at us like as if it was never just walking on 2 feet, never, like we weren't staring at it at all. But the thing that got me the most was that I noticed that it must have realized that we were behind it the whole time, because to make the decision to just go in between the cars, to just disappear like that. And then by the time we reached the cars, it was already just calmly sitting there looking at us. It was freaky. I was just like, this thing must have known we were behind it the whole time in order to put itself in a position to where it's looking at us when we walk by. That's what made me feel like it was something that wasn't from this world, something that was way more intelligent than I was. Because what kind of animal, what kind of thing, has eyes in the back of its head? So, from that day, it just never sat right with me. And I was just like, I don't know, even to this day, even after researching and hearing other people's encounters, I'm like, I don't know what to make of this thing. It's just something that I've never gotten over and never been able to deal with. And that day has always stuck with me. And here it is. I'm finally sharing this encounter 2021, and it's still like yesterday. I can tell the story 1,000 times and it still doesn't even sit right with me.
Oh, I'm sure it does feel like it was yesterday still. Yeah, an experience like that is definitely going to hang with you. Did the fact that Dogman came into such a populated area make them more frightening in your opinion, or did that not have that much of an effect in your opinion about how dangerous they are?
It made me question myself more. I wasn't sure if I was seeing it because it was in an area that was so popular. So the fact that it was just walking up the street, not casually because it was looking like it had somewhere to go, but the fact that it was walking up the street and anybody could see it, it made me question whether I was seeing it correctly. Because I'm like, how could this thing just walk down the street and nobody even see it, or it think that nobody sees it? So I kind of thought that it was playing with my own eyes. And then remember at first I told you I couldn't even make it out with my eyes. I thought it was a kid. And then the longer I stared at it, I realized it was so tall. So seeing something that's 10 feet tall walking up the street in a project area, you're going to think that you're seeing things.
Yeah, that you are. You see a lot of strange things in the projects, but you don't expect to see a 10-foot tall Dogman. Did it give you the impression it was a mindless beast, or did it give you the impression that maybe it was a thinking creature?
It was definitely a thinking creature. It was calculated. I'm not sure. It moved so quickly that it made you feel like it knew the area way longer than you've ever been in the area or anybody's been in the area. Because once you get out that project, that is a busy street. Because when I told you, when you take a right and it goes down to Shells, that leads to an intersection. That intersection leads to the highway that you can go right towards Holyoke. You can take a left towards Greenfield, and that leads towards the Mass Pike. So that's a heavy populated area once you get out of that project area. But then alongside the highway is also woods. So I'm thinking like that creature, must have some kind of intellect to where it knows where it's going if it thinks it's going to walk out the projects and nobody's going to see it. So yeah, it definitely made me feel like it was calculated, it was smart, it was intelligent, it was aware of its surroundings, not just a normal animal. Not just a typical creature.
It's good you realize that because, yeah, they're definitely far from that. They're very calculating, very intelligent, as you know now.
Yeah.
When you and your friend walked past it, as it was hunkered down between those two cars, how close were you to it?
I would say I walked in the street because, we both walked in the street because we were both next to each other. But we walked in the street because I didn't think that this thing was going to be between the cars. As crazy as it seemed, I didn't think it was going to be there. So I wasn't even on the sidewalk anymore. I was on the side. I was in the street because I wanted to see if it was next to the cars. So I would say from where it was between the cars to where we were walking, I would say 4 feet. 4 feet laying down. That's it. No further than 4 feet.
Wow, yeah, that's close. That's way too close for comfort.
Yep, definitely.
Considering how close you were to it, did you notice any smell coming from it?
I didn't. I didn't notice any smell. I didn't notice any movement. It would seem like it was a statue if the eyes weren't so if the eyes weren't so focused and the eyes seemed to follow us. It looked at us the whole time we passed it. I would have thought it was a still creature. Did no smell, no odor, just still and quiet. Didn't move a muscle.
That's awfully creepy. Really creepy. You mentioned the woods behind the project. How big are those woods?
So the area behind the woods is probably I would say about a half block of woods just behind the projects and behind the elementary school that sits in front of the project. But the woods across the street where the CVS is located, across the street from the Shells, the one that extends alongside the highway, that goes the whole length of the highway. Where I had the encounter at, just probably about a half a block of woods. Not a lot of woods behind the projects at all.
It sounds like there are quite a bit of woods in that area, but do you have any population of deer around there?
In Chicopee, no. Not in Chicopee Center. I would say, let me correct myself, because there is, the Willimanson area is part of, which is further away from Chicopee Center. But in Chicopee Center, it's just called the center because it's just a small little, probably like a little 2-mile, 3-mile radius. But there's no deer there. You're not going to spot any deer. You'll spot, typical rodents, raccoons, possums. That's it.
If there weren't any deer there, did you ever hear about dogs going missing?
No, not at all. I had 2 cats at the time. Chicopee Center has a lot of stray cats. So no reports of anything missing, anybody missing, any creatures or any animals like that. Small dogs or cats.
Huh, well, that's a good thing then. Did you ever think about making a lot of noise in an attempt to get attention from people who might have been around?
No, it didn't cross my mind. Once we seen that the guy was walking down the street and for some reason didn't pay it no mind or didn't see it, I didn't want to make the noise. And then this thing was 10 feet tall. So I didn't want it to turn around and see us because I thought that it didn't know we were behind it. So I was like, this thing is 10 feet tall. I'm not going to alert it. I didn't even think that it was behind it. It wasn't until we passed the cars and it was already looking at us that I realized, oh, shoot, this thing is looking. This thing knew the whole time that we were behind it. How long it knew we were behind it, I'm not sure. Like I said, it's probably like a half a mile from just walking up the street from the apartment building to reach the projects. So between that area where the street that leads to the project, there's a fire station. There was, at the time, there was a Bank of America over there. There's a little post office. So it would have had to, if it's seen us for that long, then it would have been in that area. But since it was already on the sidewalk when we reached the bottom of the projects, it either came out of the woods or came onto one of the neighboring dark streets that lead to that project area.
It's not a comforting thought at all, but it probably knew that you were there before you knew it was there.
Yeah, definitely. How long it knew it, I'm not sure. And that's what still creeps me out to this day.
Yeah, that thought doesn't exactly give you the warm and fuzzies, but I'm pretty sure that's how it was. When we spoke for the first time, you told me that it gave you the impression it was from another world. What was it about it that made you say that?
The first thing when the encounter happened, the first thing was the fact that it was a blackout. And I had never experienced a blackout. Like I've had, power go out for a second, then it'll kick back in. But I've never had like a blackout where everybody's like, oh, everybody in the neighborhood, yeah, it's a blackout, So that the first thing was that we experienced that encounter on a day that it was a blackout, and the only blackout that I've experienced is in my 31 years. On top of that, it seemed like it wasn't paying attention to anybody. Well, whether it be that it didn't see anybody or it wasn't focused on anybody, it seemed like it completely blocked out everything that was around it and was on a mission to get to wherever it was going. On top of that, when I looked at it when we were walking by, it just seemed like the color of it didn't seem. The color of it is not from this world. I've never seen a black like that. I've never seen a creature like that was that color in this world. So right then and there, I thought this creature is not from here. The color of it, the height of it, the longness of the ears, the longness of the nose, the focus of the eyes, the darkness of the eyes. If you've seen horse eyes, you understand what I'm saying, that there's not a lot of animals that have those kind of eyes. So the bigness and the bulbiness, but to answer your question, I would say the color out of anything. That thing was like so black. You can put it in a black room and still see it.
You had never seen one before that moment and hope you never see one again.
I hope I never see one again, no. I do like animals, so not unless, like I said, I am aware that we aren't the only people or things in this world. So not unless there was some kind of studies on these things and people knew what they were, and the history on them and the background on them, then okay, yes, I can understand. But the fact that people are seeing these encounters and there's still no kind of research or still unknown research about these things, that's the part that gets me.
You said you like animals, but definitely not ones like that.
Yeah, not the ones that I don't know anything about.
Yeah, I don't blame you. You told us about the white legs it had, but what kind of leg structure did it have?
I would say kind of like a goat. I didn't see, it was 3 feet of stiffness. So either it had like some kind of like hoofs, but it wasn't like dog feet. It was just stiff. I would say like goat legs, like stiffness, a 3 feet length of white stiffness. So I would say like kind of like hoofs.
Well, that's strange because, yeah, dogmen don't have hooves. It was dark out, so it would have been hard for you to see. Is there a chance that maybe it did have dog-like back legs, and because its back legs weren't as flexible as a lot of the dog's back legs that you've seen in the years that you've been here, that maybe it gave you that impression? I'm not trying to put thoughts into your head, but how sure are you that it actually had hooves?
I'm not sure. No, I'm not sure that it had hoofs, but the leg structure, like I'm saying, like if you see like a goat, the stiffness of the legs, you would, okay, so if you've seen a goat and you've seen the stiffness of the legs, you would assume it had hoofs. So I would assume it had hoofs by the stiffness of the legs, but I wasn't able to see the feet. All I was able to see is 3 feet of stiff whiteness. So I'm not sure what kind of feet it had. I'm not even sure what kind of body frame it had. I just know it was 10 feet tall. The beginning 3 feet of it was white. The rest of it was a black mass. And I couldn't see the face until I got up close. But I don't want to say that I had hoofs. No, I wasn't able to see that. All I seen was those 3 feet of stiff legs walking up the hill. And I was thinking at first that it was a kid until I was like, oh, that's not a kid. It's like 9:00 at night. When I tried to make it out, I realized it was like a black mass of like blackness, about 10 feet tall, and it had pointy ears. The ears is what made me, and I could see that the hands looked like they were bent, that I couldn't make it out if the hands were paws or not. And when I got up close, it was hiding its hands. All I could see was the elbows. So I couldn't barely make out anything. The only thing that made me say, okay, this is a dog, is the fact that the ears were pointy and that it looked like a dog walking on 2 feet. It looked like a dog walking on 2 feet, like a 10-foot dog walking on 2 feet. When you look at the ears, it looks like a German Shepherd.
If that isn't a lot to process, then yeah, I don't know what is.
Yeah, definitely. Like I said, I could tell this story 1,000 times, and it would be like yesterday.
Oh, I'm sure it would be. I'm sure of that. When you walked right past it, what was it doing with its ears? Were they laid back or standing up?
Ears were standing up, stiff up.
Okay, I see. Well, it's a lot better than having them laid back, pinned. So, at least that's good news. After having that experience, do you freak out now anytime your power goes out?
No, I don't, but I'm not going to go outside taking a walk. I'll tell you that much. But I don't flip, especially now with all the storms going on. I don't flip out. No, not when the power's out. But I'm definitely not going to go walking around outside, not in Chicopee and not at 9:00 at night.
Can't say I blame you. I can't say I blame you at all. When you first saw it, where do you think it was going?
I couldn't tell you. To knowing the area and having lived there, by the time I moved out, it was about 3 years I had lived in the area. So knowing that area, it either went in the backyard of the projects to where those woods are. Because I'll tell you what, if it crossed the street, then it's crazy for crossing that street because it's populated right there. But once you cross that street, there is those woods alongside the highway. So it either went behind the project where those woods are between the elementary school, or it went across the street to the woods alongside the highway.
I guess that's kind of an unfair question because there's no way you could know where it was going. Well, it's about time for us to get out of here, Sabrina, but before we do you have any closing comments you'd like to share?
No, I just wanted a chance to share my experience. If anybody is out there and had these kind of encounters and can relate, I hope I'm coming forward with my story. They're able to understand that there is somebody out there, especially if they're from Massachusetts. I've been here my whole life. So if you're from Massachusetts and you've seen this dogman, that you're definitely not alone. Definitely not alone.
No, you're not alone. That's for sure. Well, I can't thank you enough for coming on and sharing the details of that experience with us. I really do appreciate it. Well, thanks again so much for coming on. Have a great night. If you've had a dogman encounter of your own and would like to speak with me, whether in private or on the show, please go to dogmanencounters.com and submit a report. I'd love to hear from you.